keep getting all these people that want to tell me on the call-in show and in the comments section, Lou, you know UJ's not an unbeatable team. Yeah, I know. There's no such thing as an unbeatable team. There's never been an unbeatable team in any sport on any level in the history of mankind. But there's lots of teams that have never been beat. And Georgia is currently one of those teams, and they're going to finish the season as one of those teams. They're going to beat TCU. It still won't mean they're unbeatable. It just means no one beat them. They'll be 15-0 and national champions. There is no such thing as an unbeatable team. But am I worried? Like, Lou, you don't think there's any chance Georgia can lose? There's always a chance somebody can lose in any given day. I mean, I don't care what two teams you're talking about. I mean, we've all, or the majority of us anywhere around here, have been watching college football a long time. There's not a week that goes by in the college football season without an upset, and really without a huge upset. But Georgia's a significant favorite in this game for a reason. They're the biggest favorite in college football playoff championship game history. But of course Georgia can be beaten. No one's unbeatable. No one's ever been unbeatable. And of course Georgia could lose this game. Upsets happen all the time. That's why we play these games. Of course it could happen. It is funny to hear Alabama fans run around talking about, Georgia could lose. Georgia could, just because they're favored don't mean nothing. Now, these are the same Alabama fans that thought they should have been in the playoffs because they would have been favored in a hypothetical matchup against playoff teams. You know what I mean? So it is kind of funny to hear the Bama man say that. But yeah, Georgia could lose this game, and they can lose this game. I don't think they will. I'm very confident that Georgia's going to win this game, and I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I think Georgia wins by a minimum of 2 scores. Could be 3 scores, 17 to 20 points, something like that. But what worries me about TCU? Obviously, Max Duggan. I mean, Max Duggan's an amazing quarterback. I've loved watching him play this year. Max Duggan's... Ask somebody who really likes Max Duggan to explain to you what it is they like about Max Duggan. It's hard to put into words. At least it is for me. It's an intangible sort of just something, right? Like whether you want the it factor, the clutch gene, the grittiness, the determination. I mean, when you hear people talk about Max Duggan, they don't really talk about him like the way they talk about other great quarterbacks, like, oh, he's got a great arm, or, oh my God, he really sees the defense, or whatever. He's super athletic. That's not really how people describe Max Duggan. And I have a hard time describing what I like about Max Duggan too. Really, what I like about Max Duggan is just watching him play. I've watched a lot of TCU this year. Georgia's my favorite team, but I'm a college football fan, and TCU was one of the most exciting teams to watch in all of college football this year, week in and week out. Now, a lot of what made them exciting is also what made people kept saying every single week, they're going to lose, they're going to lose, they're going to lose, they're going to lose. And then, of course, they never lost until the Big 12 title game where they did lose to Kansas State. But a lot of why they kept winning and not losing was because of Max Duggan. What about Max Duggan? His stats, his numbers, his yards, his arm strength, his accuracy. Not that any of that is bad, but it's just, it's sort of his just unwillingness to give up in a game. TCU was down in the second half time and time again this season. Huge comeback after huge comeback in the second half. It was just unbelievable to see. Now, I don't think Max Duggan should get 100% of the credit for every single amazing second half that TCU played, but as the leader of that team, I do believe that the rest of the people on that team got some of their confidence from what they saw in Max Duggan. He's the leader of that team, and there's no doubt or question about it. I think the rest of the team takes their cues from Max Duggan. The guy is absolutely fun to watch. And TCU's never really out of it. So that would be the first thing I would mention when I talk about what worries me about TCU. Max Duggan overall, and then TCU's ability in the second half to have that never say die kind of attitude. People are making a huge deal out of Georgia's 14-point comeback in the fourth quarter against Ohio State. And I agree, it was amazing. It's the largest comeback in playoff history there in the fourth quarter. And there is something to the fact that they did it in a playoff game, right, against what was widely considered one of the best teams in the country, as opposed to, TCU doing it to Oklahoma State or Baylor or Kansas or somebody like that during the Big 12 schedule. But TCU's been doing that all year long. TCU has been busy losing games in the second half all year long and winning in the end. And that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what the score is with a minute to go in the fourth quarter or 5 minutes or 1 second. Doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the score when that clock hits zero. And TCU, Max Duggan particularly, and TCU as a whole, their ability to play every single play like they're going to win the game, regardless of what the score is. It's just been unbelievable to watch. Max Duggan in particular, right? And this isn't specific to the second half. This is just more along the lines of what worries me about Max Duggan. Clearly, this is the type of quarterback who's got an ability to extend plays, right? We've all seen Max Duggan take off running a bunch of times this year. He scrambles in the pocket. He can roll out. He can roll to the left, roll to the right, extend plays, keep eyes downfield to make the pass, or take off running. If it's 3rd and 5, I'm sure TCU fans feel this way. And if anybody else has watched any TCU football at all this year, you likely feel the same way too. If TCU's got the ball and it's 3rd and 5, and Max Duggan drops back to pass, and for whatever reason, he scrambles away and takes off running, whether it's because he's under pressure or the receivers are covered or whatever it is. If it's 3rd and 5 and Max Duggan takes off running, don't you know he's gaining 6 yards? You just know. You just know. If it's 3rd and 5, he's gaining 6. If it's 3rd and 4, he's gaining 5. If it's 3rd and 8, he'll gain 9. You just know he's going to do it the minute he takes off running. Now, does he do it 100% of the time? No, nobody does anything 100% of the time, but again, it's just that confidence that you have in a guy like Max Duggan to make the play that needs to be made when it needs to be made. And so that's something that worries me. Georgia's ability to get off the field on 3rd down with Max Duggan extending plays or making plays with his arm or his legs, right? Sticking with the offense, Quentin Johnston. Now, Quentin Johnston worries me because he's an elite level wide receiver. But it worries me less than, say, a Ohio State passing attack, or honestly, even an LSU passing attack. Quentin Johnston is great. And so even if you want to compare him to the other great wide receivers in college football this year, Marvin Harrison, Jalen Hyatt, whoever, Jordan Addison at Southern Cal, whoever you want to compare him to, even if for the sake of argument you assume he's as good as all of those guys, okay, that's great. Let's take Ohio State. TCU's number 2 wide receiver and number 3 wide receiver aren't in the same universe as Ohio State's number 2 and number 3. They're just not. Or LSU's. Or Tennessee's, for that matter, with Brew McCoy and Cedric Tillman and those guys that Tennessee has. That does make it easier to defend Tennessee's passing attack, or TCU's passing attack overall, than it does somebody like a Tennessee or an LSU or a Southern Cal, a team that's just got multiple NFL wide receivers lined up on the field at the same time. I'm not knocking TCU's number 2 and number 3. I'm just strictly comparing them to wide receivers on the teams, other teams that are considered to have elite passing games like Ohio State. You saw this in the Georgia game, right? You can't just focus on Marvin Harrison. Marvin Harrison only had 2 catches total in the second and third quarter of the Georgia game. But how many did Emeka Egbuka have? How many did Julian Fleming have? These are NFL players at your wide receiver 2 and 3. TCU doesn't have that. So that doesn't mean that Quentin Johnston will be ineffective in this game. It does mean, though, that I think that Georgia defensively can afford to pay more attention to Quentin Johnston individually than they were able to do to Marvin Harrison individually, right? Because you don't have to worry as much about the TCU 2 and 3 wide receiver as you do the Ohio State 2 and 3 wide receiver. So that's not to say that Georgia's secondary is going to come down here and shut them down. Georgia's secondary has obviously gotten lit up in the last 6 quarters that it's played, going back to the second half of the SEC title game. And I'm sure Quentin Johnston will have some great plays. I'm positive that he will. I'm not talking about just Quentin Johnston or his ability to make plays. I'm talking about the TCU passing attack as a whole as it compares to Ohio State. Because I hear a lot of people saying, well, Ohio State exposed Georgia in that passing game. No one else has that passing game, including TCU. As much as I love Max Duggan, and I've been talking about Max Duggan since like week 4 this year. I've loved watching him play every single week, talking about him nonstop. Now, I had no idea Georgia was going to end up in a game against him, but I'm not going to go back on what I said. He's an amazing quarterback. That being said, he's not C.J. Stroud when it comes to throwing the ball. He's just not. And that's why, he won't get drafted as high as C.J. Stroud. He's not that level of a thrower. Determination, heart, will, whatever. He's got that. No one's got more. But pure passing ability, no. C.J. Stroud is better than Max Duggan, and C.J. Stroud's got better options across the board at wide receiver than Max Duggan does. So, yeah, Quentin Johnston does worry me as an individual wide receiver, yes. The TCU passing game as a whole, it's several rungs below anything Ohio State is, for sure. Ohio State, probably the cream of the crop wide receiver group. Southern Cal would be up there. Tennessee's wide receivers had a good year. Several teams across the country. TCU's not in that category as a wide receiver group. Again, that's not a knock on Quentin Johnston. He's amazing. I'd take him on Georgia in a heartbeat, and he'll be an NFL star, no question. What else about TCU could be problematic or concerning? Well, what about their defense? I'm not impressed with their defense overall. You look at the numbers, they're not very good. They give up a ton of points. They give up a ton of yards, both running and passing. If there's something about the defense that concerns me, and I'm really stretching here, because I'm trying not to come off like, oh, they've got no chance to win. I've stated clearly, any team that lines up to play has a chance to win. It's hard for me to be concerned at all about anything with TCU defensively, though. It just really is. As much as I've loved watching TCU, their defense has not been very impressive to me. So if I had to pick something defensively as a potential worry or concern, they run an odd defense. They run 3-3-5. It's not something you play against week in and week out. It's not something you spend multiple weeks a season preparing for, because the majority of teams that you play are going to run a 4-3 or 3-4, or with some dime and nickel variations. But that's basically what you're practicing against week to week. So you're not running up against the 3-3-5 constantly over the course of the year. So it's a little unfamiliar. Maybe the blocking assignments will be a little bit different up front for the O-line. Where the blitzes are coming from could be something that maybe Georgia hasn't seen that much of offensively compared to some other more kind of standard defenses that you see week to week. So, I guess that could potentially cause some problems. But again, it's really hard for me to even pretend to be worried about TCU defensively. They do create some turnovers, and Georgia's had an issue with that. So maybe that's something you would put in the category that could be a little worrisome. As good as Georgia's been, and the whole 14-0 thing, two areas that really have not been good for Georgia this year: sacking the quarterback and the turnover margin. Georgia does not have a good turnover. Georgia's negative in the turnover margin. Georgia turns the ball over more offensively than they create turnovers defensively. So maybe the defense comes up with a couple of turnovers there. Could be obviously problematic. I mean, you don't ever want to give anybody extra possessions. You definitely don't want to give a team extra possessions on your own end of the field, but basically giving them, a minimum of 3 points, depending on where you turn it over, potentially 7. So that's something that kind of just always worries me going into any big game especially. But the way Georgia has performed this year in terms of turnover margin, it's been a concern of mine heading into every game. Just not a great turnover margin this year for UGA. That's honestly about it. If I try to really think about what are the things that could bother me, I guess there are some other things that you would consider non-football related, or at least things that don't happen on the field. But Georgia is a huge favorite. Most people are picking Georgia to win and win comfortably. TCU's not a big name program that maybe you think about all year long as a potential opponent in a title game. So, maybe you worry about with Georgia, maybe some not laziness, but kind of overconfidence setting in. I kind of find, my pushback against that would be, I don't know if it's possible for anybody to be overconfident in a national title game. I think you're almost forced to respect your opponent, whoever they are, in a national title game because they made it to a national title game. I also think, as disappointing as it is that Georgia's defense has played bad the last 6 quarters, that could potentially be used as some serious motivation for Georgia's defense to come out and prepare well this week or Monday against TCU. So, no, I don't think it's an automatic guaranteed win. They just show up, flip the coin, and hand the trophy to Georgia. No, I don't think that. Yes, I think TCU could pull the upset and win the game. It's always a possibility. The same way that Texas A&M lost to App State, or Notre Dame lost to Marshall, or whatever you want to name them. Like I said, we've all seen a million upsets over the years in our time watching college football, but I don't see it happening in a game of this magnitude. I think Georgia's got the better head coach. I think they've got the better coaching staff. There's no doubt that they have the better players. I mean, that's just a scientific fact. I mean, you just check the recruiting. Georgia is clearly way more talented than TCU. None of those things individually guarantee a win for Georgia. Those things collectively, though, lead to Georgia being a almost 2-touchdown favorite in this game, and to me, that makes sense. I think TCU's had an amazing run. I think their win over Michigan in the college football playoff is going to be the pinnacle for them, though. And, look, let's give credit to TCU. That game forced a lot of people to give TCU the respect that really they should have already had. If you make the playoffs in a 4-team playoff, you're a really good team. So 130 teams that start every season with a goal of making the playoffs. TCU was one of 4 that managed to find their way in this year. So they probably should have been given some respect before the Michigan game was ever played. But if there was anybody still doubting TCU, they're not anymore. They definitely earned the respect from everybody with that game against Michigan. But I do think that was it for them. I think it comes to an end Monday night. I do think Georgia wins the game. But no, I don't think it's a guaranteed win for Georgia. I don't think it's a show up and automatic win type of deal. And yes, TCU can definitely win the game. I just happen to think that they won't, and I don't think it'll be particularly close. We got blessed with 2 amazing first-round playoff games, which, do you have any idea how unusual that is? Go back and look at the scores of all the playoff games that have been played since 2014. All but about 4 of them have been blowouts over the last 8 or 9, over the length of the playoffs. 8, 9 years we've been doing this. All but 4 games have been blowouts in the playoffs. 2 of the best college football games you'll ever see occurred in the playoffs this year with TCU, Michigan, Georgia, and Ohio State. Unfortunately, I feel like that means we're due for an egg here, and I think that's what we're going to get. I think Georgia wins easily. But yes, of course, TCU has a chance to win.